Most people wait for inspiration. Inventors create it. You don't need a genius IQ to invent. You need habits that force your mind to think differently. I am Thomas Edison, and I never waited for perfect ideas. I built them, tested them, broke them, and rebuilt again. Thinking like an inventor isn't about brilliance. It's about obsession, curiosity, and discipline. For 30 days, I'll challenge you to rewire how you see problems. Because invention isn't luck. It's a mindset. Follow these steps, and you'll stop waiting for breakthroughs and start producing them. Subscribe to our channel if you're ready to master your mind, and tell us, where are you watching from? Let me tell you something about invention that most people get wrong. They think it starts with a brilliant idea, a flash of genius, a moment when everything becomes crystal clear. But that's not how it works, not even close. I've created thousands of inventions, and do you know how many started with perfect clarity? None of them. Not the light bulb, not the phonograph, not a single one. The inventor's mindset begins with motion, with the courage to start before you're ready. Here's what I learned in my laboratory that changed everything. Clarity doesn't create action. Action creates clarity. You want to think like an inventor. Stop waiting for the perfect idea to arrive. Your mind is like a machine. It needs momentum to generate power. When I started working on the light bulb, I didn't have a clear path. What I had was a problem that needed solving and the willingness to begin. That's all you need. The rest reveals itself through action. Let me give you your first challenge for these 30 days. Every morning, before your mind has a chance to fill with doubts, take one small step towards something you want to create. Don't analyze it. Don't question it. Don't wait until you feel ready. Just begin. This is what separates inventors from dreamers. Dreamers wait for inspiration to strike. Inventors strike first and inspiration follows. I've seen it thousands of times in my laboratory. The moments of breakthrough never come when we're sitting still, thinking. They come when we're deep in the work, hands dirty, fully engaged in the process. You see, your brain is literally wired to think differently when you're in motion. It's a biological fact. When you're actively engaged in creating something, your neural pathways fire differently. New connections form. Possibilities emerge that were invisible when you were static. I remember days in my lab when I'd start working on one problem and discover the solution to another. Why? Because motion creates opportunity. Movement generates possibilities. Action breeds insight. But here's the part most people miss. This motion doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't even have to be in the right direction at first. The key is to generate momentum. Any momentum. Think about pushing a heavy cart. The hardest part isn't keeping it moving. It's getting it to move in the first place. Your mind works the same way. Once you're in motion, ideas begin to flow. Problems begin to solve themselves. Solutions emerge from the action itself. For these next 30 days, I want you to embrace imperfect action over perfect planning. Start before you feel ready. Move before you have clarity. This isn't reckless, it's strategic. Because in the realm of invention, motion reveals the path. Make this your new morning ritual. Instead of checking your phone, instead of planning your day, instead of waiting for inspiration, take one concrete step toward creating something. Anything. Draw a sketch. Write down an idea. Build a rough prototype. The specific action matters less than the fact that you're moving. Remember this. Every major invention that has changed the world started with someone who was willing to begin. Before they had it all figured out. The telephone, the airplane, the computer, all of these began with imperfect action, not perfect insight. The inventor's mindset isn't about having all the answers. It's about having the courage to start asking questions through action, to build before you're certain, to move before you're ready. So today, right now, take that first step. Don't wait for motivation. Don't wait for clarity. Don't wait for permission. Motion first. Understanding follows. This is how inventors think. This is how breakthroughs happen. Tomorrow. Morning, when you wake up, I want you to remember, the inventor's mindset begins with motion, Not thought, not planning, motion. Now, what will you begin today? Let me tell you about the day I finally succeeded in creating the light bulb. It wasn't actually a success at all. It was failure number 9,999. But here's what separated me from others. I never saw these as failures. Each attempt was an experiment, and every experiment taught me something new. This is where most minds go wrong. They set expectations, and when reality doesn't match those expectations, they call it failure. But in my laboratory, we didn't have failures. We had experiments. And every experiment was valuable, regardless of its outcome. Here's what most people don't understand about the inventor's mind. It's not about being right. It's about being curious. When you approach each day as a series of experiments rather than a quest for immediate success, something remarkable happens. Your mind opens up. The pressure dissolves. You become free to discover rather than desperate to succeed. I remember testing thousands of materials for the light bulb filament: platinum, cotton, wood, even human hair. Each one taught us something. Each failure eliminated one possibility and pointed us toward others. This wasn't failure. This was progress through elimination. For the next part of our 30-day journey, I want you to radically shift how you think about your daily activities. Stop thinking in terms of success and failure. Start thinking in terms of experiments and data. When I ran my laboratory, I had a simple rule: document everything. Every attempt, every result, every unexpected outcome. Why? Because in the world of invention, there's no such thing as useless data. What seems like a dead end today might be the breakthrough you need tomorrow. Let me give you a practical framework for thinking in experiments. First, every morning, set up your day as a series of small experiments. Don't say, "I'm going to succeed at this today." Instead, say, "I'm going to test 3 different approaches to this problem today." Second, for each experiment, define what you're testing and what you're measuring. Be specific. In my laboratory, we didn't just try things randomly. We had a EE hypothesis for each test. What do you think will happen? Why? Write it down. Third, and this is crucial, remove all emotional attachment to the outcomes. When you're conducting an experiment, you're a scientist observing results, not a creator. Defending your work. This objectivity is essential for true innovation. Here's what happens when you think in experiments. Your fear of failure disappears. Why? Because experiments can't fail. They can only produce data. Every result moves you forward, even if it's not the result you wanted. I want you to understand something profound about this approach. It's not just about inventing physical objects. This experimental mindset works for everything: business strategies, personal relationships, daily habits. Every aspect of your life can be approached as a series of thoughtful experiments. Remember the time I was working on the phonograph? Everyone said it was impossible to capture sound. But I didn't approach it as a pass-fail test. I approached it as a series of experiments. Each attempt taught us something about sound, about materials, about mechanics. Each failure was actually a lesson that brought us closer to success. For these next 30 days, I want you to reframe every challenge in your life as an experiment. Having trouble with a project? Turn it into a series of small experiments. Stuck in a creative rut? Design experiments to test different approaches. Facing a difficult decision? Create experiments to gather data. The beauty of this mindset is that it keeps you moving forward. When you're experimenting, you can't really get stuck. Every result gives you new information, new directions to explore, new possibilities to test. This is how inventors think. We don't expect, we experiment. We don't assume, we test. We don't fear failure, we gather data. Every day is a laboratory. Every attempt is an experiment, and every outcome is information. So tomorrow morning, when you start your day, don't set expectations. Design experiments. Don't demand success. Seek understanding. This is how breakthroughs happen. This is how inventors think. And remember, The greatest experiment you're conducting is on your own mind. These 30 days, they're not about achieving perfection. They're about gathering data on how your mind can work differently, think differently, create differently. What experiment will you begin tomorrow? The quality of your inventions depends entirely on the quality of your questions. This is something I learned early in my career, and it transformed everything about how I approached problems. Most people are trying to find answers, but inventors? We're obsessed with finding better questions. Let me take you inside my laboratory for a moment. When we were working on the phonograph, I didn't start by asking, how can I make a machine that plays music? That question was too broad, too vague. Instead, I asked, what happens when a needle moves across a surface vibrating from sound waves? Do you see the difference? The second question leads directly to experimentation. Here's what most people don't understand about the inventor's mind. It's not about having all the answers. It's about developing an insatiable curiosity that leads to better and better questions. Every morning before the world crowds in with its demands and distractions, you need to train your mind to ask questions that force new perspectives. I'm going to give you a morning ritual that I used throughout my career. Every day, before you begin your work, take out a notebook and ask yourself these 3 categories of questions. First, the what's missing questions. Look around you. What's incomplete? What's inefficient? What's broken? Don't just focus on physical objects. Look at processes, systems, relationships. Train your mind to spot the gaps that others miss. Second, the what-if questions. This is where possibility lives. What if this problem could be solved in the opposite way? What if we removed the main component instead of trying to fix it? What if we combined 2 unrelated things? The more absurd the question seems at first, the more potential it might hold. Third, and most importantly, the why not questions. These are the questions that challenge assumptions. Why not do it backwards? Why not make it smaller instead of bigger? Why not eliminate the problem entirely instead of solving it? These questions break through the barriers of conventional thinking. Let me share something personal with you. When I was working on the light bulb, I filled notebooks with questions. But here's what's interesting. The question that led to the breakthrough wasn't, how do I make light? It was, why does this material burn out so quickly? You see, better questions lead to better observations, which lead to better solutions. For the next part of our 30-day journey, I want you to become a master of morning questions. But not just any questions, questions that make your mind uncomfortable, questions that force you to think in new patterns, questions that make others raise their eyebrows. Here's your daily practice. Every morning, before you check your phone, before you begin your day's tasks, take out a notebook. Write down 10 questions about something you're working on. But here's the rule. The first 3 questions will be obvious, so throw them out. The next 4 will be interesting, so keep them. The last 3? Those are usually where the gold is. Train yourself to push past the obvious questions. Anyone can ask, how do I make this better? The inventor asks, what if better isn't the goal? What if we need worse in some ways to be better in others? These are the questions that lead to breakthroughs. Remember this. The human mind is lazy. It wants to ask the same questions it asked yesterday. Your job is to force it onto new paths, to make it uncomfortable, to make it work harder. This is how you develop the inventor's mindset. I want you to understand something crucial about this. Practice. It's not just about finding solutions. It's about training your mind to think differently. Every morning, when you push yourself to ask better questions, you're literally rewiring your neural pathways. You're building the mental muscles of an inventor. Here's another secret from my years of invention. The best questions often sound ridiculous at first. When I asked, what if we could capture sound and play it back later? People laughed. They said it was impossible. But that question led to the phonograph. Never let the apparent absurdity of a question stop you from pursuing it. For these next 30 days, become obsessed with questions. Carry a notebook everywhere. Write down every question that crosses your mind. But don't stop at the first question, or the second, or the third. Keep pushing until you find questions that make you think differently. And remember, the goal isn't to find answers immediately. The goal is to train your mind to explore new territories, to see problems from angles that others miss, to challenge every assumption that crosses your path. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, don't reach for answers. Reach for better questions. This is how inventors think. This is how breakthroughs begin. What questions will you ask tomorrow that you've never asked before? Let me tell you about the most valuable invention I ever created. It wasn't the light bulb, it wasn't the phonograph. It was my system of documentation, 5 million pages of notes, sketches, and observations. Every thought, every experiment, every failure, every success, all documented. Your mind is not a reliable storage device. It needs a laboratory on paper. Here's what most people don't understand about invention. It's not about having great ideas. It's about capturing and connecting. Small observations that lead to great ideas, but your mind can only hold so much. Without a system to capture these sparks, they vanish like smoke. I remember the exact moment I realized this. I was working on an early version of the telegraph, and I had what I thought was a breakthrough insight. But by the next morning, crucial. Details had slipped away. That's when I made documentation an obsession. Not just for finished ideas, for everything. For the next phase of our 30-day journey, you're going to create your own laboratory on paper. But let me be clear. This isn't just about keeping a journal. This is about building a system that transforms how your mind works. First, you need to understand the 3 levels of documentation that every inventor must master. Level 1 is capture, getting ideas out of your head and onto paper the moment they appear. Level 2 is connection, linking different ideas and observations to create new possibilities. Level 3 is reflection, reviewing and refining your documented thoughts to extract deeper insights. Let's start with capture. Your mind is generating valuable insights all day long, but most people let them slip away. From this moment forward, carry a notebook everywhere. Not your phone, a physical notebook. Why? Because the act of writing by hand engages your brain differently. It forces clarity. It slows you down just enough to develop your thoughts. Here's your first daily practice, the morning mind dump. Every morning, before your brain has a chance to filter itself, write down everything that's bouncing around in your head. Ideas, problems, questions, observations, get them all out. Don't judge them, don't organize them, just capture them. Next comes connection. This is where the magic happens. Every evening, review your day's notes, look for patterns, look for relationships between seemingly unrelated observations. In my laboratory, some of our biggest breakthroughs came from connecting ideas that seemed completely separate. Create what I call an idea map. Draw lines between different notes that might connect. Be ridiculous with it. The telegraph and the telephone connected. Sound waves and light waves connected. The more connections you draw, the more possibilities you create. Now, for reflection. Once a week, review all your notes from the past 7 days. But here's the key. Don't just read them. Interact with them. Ask questions about your own observations. Challenge your assumptions. Look for gaps in your thinking. Let me share a secret from my laboratory. We kept what I called failure logs. Every failed experiment was documented in detail. Why? Because today's failure often contains the seed of tomorrow's breakthrough. Your documentation system needs to capture everything, especially the things that don't work, for these next 30 days. I want you to become obsessed with documentation. But remember, this isn't about creating perfect notes. It's about building a system that extends your mind's capabilities. Think of your notebook as an external hard drive for your brain. Here's your daily documentation framework. Morning pages. Capture your raw thoughts before the day begins. Observation hours. 3 times during your day, spend 5 minutes writing down everything you notice about your current environment or problem. Evening connections. Review your day's notes and draw at least 3 new connections between different ideas Weekly integration. Every Sunday, review all your notes from the week and synthesize the key patterns and insights. But here's what makes this powerful. You're not just collecting information. You're creating a feedback loop that makes your mind work differently. The more you document, the more you notice. The more you notice, the more connections you make. The more connections you make, the more inventions become possible. I want you to understand something crucial about this practice. It's not about the quantity of notes you take. It's about training your mind to think like a laboratory. Every observation is an experiment. Every connection is a potential breakthrough. Every reflection is a chance to see something new. Remember this, your memory is unreliable, but your documentation system never forgets. Some of my most important inventions came from reviewing old notes and seeing new possibilities in things I'd observed months or years earlier. Your mind is the greatest laboratory ever created, but it needs a system to reach its full potential. Your notebook is that system. Use it religiously. Trust it completely. Let it become an extension of your thinking process. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, don't just start your day. Start documenting it. This is how inventors think. This is how breakthroughs are built. What will you capture in your laboratory today? Here's something that might shock you. Some of my greatest inventions came from deliberately breaking things that were working perfectly fine. Most people try to preserve what works. Inventors, we break things on purpose. We take functional systems and tear them apart. Why? Because true innovation often lies in the ruins of what already exists. Let me tell you about a day in my laboratory that changed how I think about invention. We had a perfectly working telegraph system. It was reliable, proven, accepted by everyone. But I gathered my team and said, today we're going to break it completely. Then we're going to see what we learned from the pieces. This is where most minds go wrong. They see something working and think, leave it alone. But the inventor's mind sees something working and thinks, what else is possible? Sometimes you have to break the working system to discover the better system hiding inside it. For the next phase of our 30-day journey, I'm going to teach you the art of strategic destruction. But let me be clear, this isn't about breaking things randomly. This is about dismantling systems with purpose, with intention, with a scientist's curiosity about what makes things work. Here's your first challenge. Identify something in your life or work that's functioning well. Could be a process, a habit, a system, anything. Now, here's the hard part. You're going to break it, not modify it, not improve it. Break it completely. But before you break anything, you need to understand the 3 levels of strategic destruction that every inventor must master. Level 1 is physical breaking, taking things apart to understand their components. Level 2 is conceptual breaking, dismantling ideas and assumptions. Level 3 is systemic breaking, challenging entire frameworks of thinking. Let's start with physical breaking. Take something simple, a pen, a clock, a toy. Take it apart completely. But here's the key. Document everything. How was it assembled? What surprises you about its construction? What seems unnecessary? What seems essential? I remember doing this with early versions of the light bulb. We didn't just try to improve them, we broke them in every way possible. We overloaded them, froze them, heated them beyond their limits. Each destruction taught us something new about how they worked. Next comes conceptual breaking. This is where you challenge every assumption about how something should work. Take your morning routine, for example. What if you did it backwards? What if you removed the most important part? What if you doubled the time for the least important part? In my laboratory, we had a rule. Every week we had to break at least one fundamental assumption about whatever we were working on. When everyone believed electricity had to flow in one direction, we asked, what if it didn't? These broken assumptions often led to our biggest breakthroughs. Now for systemic breaking. This is where you challenge entire frameworks of thinking. Take any system you work with, your productivity system, your communication system, your problem-solving system. Now identify its core principle and deliberately violate it. Here's your daily practice for the next 30 days. Every morning, choose something to break. But remember, this isn't destruction for destruction's sake. This is strategic dismantling to discover new possibilities. Start small. Break a daily habit, change it completely. Do it backwards. Do it at a different time. Remove what you think is the most important part. Watch what happens. Document everything you learn. Then move to bigger systems. Take a process at work that everyone accepts. Break it down. Question every step. Ask why each part exists. Remove pieces. Add unexpected elements. Force yourself to rebuild it in a completely different way. But here's what makes this powerful. You're not just breaking things. You're training your mind to see systems differently. Every time you break something with purpose, you strengthen your ability to see new possibilities in old problems. I want you to understand something crucial about this practice. It's not about creating chaos. It's about developing a deeper understanding of how things work by seeing how they break. Every deliberate destruction is an opportunity for discovery. Remember this. Some of the greatest inventions in history came from breaking existing systems. The automobile broke the horse and buggy system. The telephone broke the telegraph system. The electric light broke the gas lighting system. Progress often requires breaking what already works. Your mind has patterns it's comfortable with. Breaking things on purpose forces those patterns to reorganize. This discomfort, this chaos, this is where invention lives. Tomorrow morning when you wake up, don't just follow your routine. Break it. This is how inventors think. This is how breakthroughs happen. What will you break today? One of the biggest mistakes people make when trying to think like an inventor is believing that invention happens in the mind. It doesn't. True invention happens in your hands. Your mind might spark the idea, but your hands are where that spark becomes real. Let me take you back to my laboratory in Menlo Park. We didn't sit around theorizing about the light bulb. We built them, thousands of them. Every single day, our hands were working, testing, building, failing, rebuilding. This is what most people don't understand about invention. It's a physical process, not just a mental one. For the next phase of our 30-day journey, you're going to learn to think with your hands. But let me be clear, this isn't about being crafty. This is about understanding that physical engagement with your ideas changes how your brain works. Here's what happens when you engage your hands. Your brain processes problems differently. When you physically interact with a problem, you activate different neural pathways than when you just think about it. I discovered this long before neuroscience could explain it. Every major breakthrough in my laboratory came when we were physically engaged with the problem. First, you need to understand the 3 levels of physical thinking that every inventor must master. Level 1 is sketching, getting your ideas out of your head and onto paper in visual form. Level 2 is prototyping, creating rough physical versions of your ideas. Level 3 is iteration, using your hands to refine and improve your creations. Let's start with sketching. From this moment forward, stop trying to solve problems in your head. When an idea comes, grab a paper and pencil. Sketch it out, no matter how crude your drawing skills might be. The act of sketching forces your brain to clarify its own thinking. Here's your first daily practice, the morning sketch session. Every morning, take one problem you're working on and sketch 3 different ways to solve it. Don't judge the quality of your drawings. This isn't about art. It's about thinking through your hands. Next comes prototyping. This is where most people get stuck. They think they need perfect materials or skills. Nonsense. In my laboratory, we built prototypes out of whatever we had available. Paper, wire, wood scraps, anything that could help us make our ideas tangible. Create what I call a prototype kit. Fill a box with basic materials: paper, cardboard, tape, string, wire, scissors, glue. Keep it within arm's reach. The moment you have an idea, start building a rough version of it. Don't wait for perfect materials. Don't wait for perfect skills. Start building now. Now, for iteration. This is where your hands teach your mind what's possible. Take your rough prototype and improve it. But here's the key. Make physical changes, not mental ones. Don't think about how to make it better. Use your hands to discover how to make it better. Let me share a secret from my laboratory. We had a rule called 10 versions before lunch. For any new idea, we had to create 10 physical variations before we could break for lunch. Most were terrible, but the act of creating them physically always taught us something that thinking alone never could. For these next 30 days, I want you to become obsessed with physical thinking. But remember, this isn't about creating perfect prototypes. It's about using your hands to explore possibilities that your mind alone can't see. Here's your daily framework. Morning sketches, 3 different solutions to one problem. Midday making, spend 30 minutes building something related to your current challenges. Evening iteration, take one thing you built and create 3 physical variations. But here's what makes this powerful. You're not just creating physical objects. You're training your brain to think through your hands. The more you engage physically with your ideas, the more your mind learns to think in practical, tangible ways. I want you to understand something crucial about this practice. It's not about being good with your hands. It's about using physical engagement to enhance your mental capabilities. Every time you build something, your brain forms new connections. Every time you modify a prototype, your mind sees new possibilities. Remember this, some of my most important insights came when I was physically working with materials, not when I was sitting and thinking. The solution to the light bulb filament came while we were physically testing materials, not while we were theorizing about them. Your mind is powerful, but it needs your hands to fully explore possibilities. Your hands can discover things that your mind alone would never imagine. Trust them. Use them. Let them lead your thinking. Tomorrow morning when you wake up, don't just think about your challenges. Start sketching them. Start building them. This is how inventors think. This is how breakthroughs become real. What will your hands teach your mind today? When I told people I was going to create a light that burned without flame, they called it impossible. When I said I would capture sound and play it back at will, they laughed. But here's what I understood that they didn't. Impossible goals create possible breakthroughs. The very act of pursuing what others call impossible forces your mind to work at a different level. Let me tell you about the day I decided to create the phonograph. Everyone said it couldn't be done. Sound was ephemeral. It couldn't be captured, couldn't be stored, couldn't be replayed. But I didn't set out to do what was possible. I set out to do what was necessary, what was revolutionary, what was impossible. This is where most minds go wrong. They set realistic goals. They aim for incremental improvements. But the inventor's mind? It feeds on the impossible. It needs the pressure of an unreasonable challenge to reach its full potential. For the next phase of our 30-day journey, you're going to set one impossible goal. But let me be clear, this isn't about being reckless. This is about using the pressure of an unprecedented challenge to force your mind to work differently. First, you need to understand the 3 levels of impossible goals that every inventor must consider. Level 1 is technically impossible. Things that seem to violate current understanding. Level 2 is practically impossible. Things that seem too complex or resource-intensive to achieve. Level 3 is paradigm impossible. Things that challenge fundamental assumptions about what's possible. Let's start with identifying your impossible goal. But here's the key. It must be specific. Don't say, I want to change the world. Say, I want to create a device that can specific impossible thing. Don't say, I want to revolutionize my industry. Say, I want a specific impossible change in my industry within specific time frame. Here's your first exercise, the impossible goal declaration. Write down your impossible goal in exact detail. What specifically will you achieve? How will you know when you've achieved it? What fundamental barriers stand in your way? Next comes the strategy of unreason. This is where you break down your impossible goal into smaller challenges. But here's the trick. Don't start with what you know how to do. Start with what you don't know how to do. The unknown terrain is where the breakthroughs hide. In my laboratory, we had a practice called working backwards from impossible. Instead of starting with what was possible and trying to extend it, we started with what we wanted to achieve and worked backwards, regardless of whether we knew how to do each step. Now, for the daily assault on impossible, this is where you attack. Your goal every single day, regardless of whether you see progress. Some days you'll advance, some days you'll fall back. But every day, you must engage with the impossible. Let me share a secret from my years of invention. The impossible goal isn't really about achieving that specific thing. It's about forcing your mind to work at a level it wouldn't otherwise reach. When you pursue the impossible, you discover new possibilities along the way. For these next 30 days, I want you to become obsessed with your impossible goal. But remember, this isn't about achieving it in 30 days. It's about using these 30 days to begin the pursuit that will transform how you think. Here's your daily framework. Morning impossible hour. Spend the first hour of your day working solely on your impossible goal. Midday challenge review. Take 15 minutes to list new barriers you've discovered. Evening progress log. Document everything you tried, whether it worked or not. But here's what makes this powerful. You're not just pursuing a goal. You're training your mind to operate beyond its perceived limits. Every time you engage with the impossible, you expand what you believe is possible. I want you to understand something crucial about this practice. It's not about being unrealistic. It's about using the pressure of an impossible goal to force unprecedented thinking. When your mind has no choice but to solve an impossible problem, it finds ways to work that it never would have discovered otherwise. Remember this, every major breakthrough in human history started as an impossible goal. Flight was impossible. Instant global communication was impossible. Visiting the moon was impossible. But the people who pursued these impossibilities changed what was possible. Your mind is capable of far more than you realize, but it needs the pressure of an impossible challenge to reveal its full potential. The goal you choose is less important than the fact that it forces you to think beyond your current capabilities. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, don't start with what's possible. Start with what's necessary, what's revolutionary, what's impossible. This is how inventors think. This is how boundaries get broken. What impossible goal will you begin pursuing today? Let me tell you something that might surprise you. The most important quality for an inventor isn't creativity, it's patience. The willingness to do the same thing over and over, watching for the tiny variations that reveal new possibilities. Where others see monotony, the inventor sees the workshop where breakthrough is forged. I tested over 6,000 different materials for the light bulb filament. 6,000 times we went through the same process. 6,000 times we documented the results. Most people would call this boring. I called it necessary, because in those thousands of repetitions, patterns emerged that we never would have seen otherwise. This is where most minds go wrong. They chase excitement. They want every moment to feel new. But the inventor's mind, it understands that monotony is the mother of mastery. That repetition isn't just about doing, it's about seeing deeper into the nature of things. For the next phase of our 30-day journey, you're going to learn to embrace monotony. But let me be clear, this isn't about mindless repetition. This is about conscious, deliberate engagement with repeated processes until they reveal their secrets. First, you need to understand the 3 levels of monotony that every inventor must master. Level 1 is physical monotony, repeating physical actions with full attention. Level 2 is observational monotony, watching the same process multiple times with increasing awareness. Level 3 is analytical monotony, documenting and analyzing. Repeated experiences to extract patterns. Let's start with physical monotony. Choose one simple task related to your current challenge. It could be testing a material, practicing a movement, or repeating a calculation. Now, commit to doing it 100 times. But here's the key. Each repetition must be done with full attention, full engagement. Here's your first daily practice, the 100 repetitions. Every morning, choose one small but significant action and repeat it 100 times. Don't rush. Don't zone out. Stay present. Notice everything about each repetition. Next comes observational monotony. This is where you watch the same process repeatedly, but with evolving attention. In my laboratory, we would watch the same experiment dozens of times, each time focusing on a different aspect. The filaments glow, the rate of deterioration, the color changes. Each viewing revealed something new. Create what I call an observation grid. Divide a page into sections. Each time you observe your repeated process, focus on a different aspect. Document everything. What looks different this time? What did you miss before? What patterns are emerging? Now, for analytical monotony, this is where you take all those repeated observations and start looking for patterns. But here's the trick. Don't look for what you expect to find. Look for what doesn't make sense. The anomalies, the outliers, the tiny variations that don't fit the pattern. Let me share a secret from my years of invention. Breakthrough often hides in the boring details. The phonograph came from noticing a tiny vibration that occurred repeatedly. In a completely different experiment, we only saw it because we had done that experiment hundreds of times. For these next 30 days, I want you to become obsessed with repetition. But remember, this isn't about going through the motions. It's about developing the kind of attention that can spot the extraordinary hiding in the ordinary. Here's your daily framework. Morning repetitions. Choose one action and repeat it 100 times with full attention. Midday observation. Watch one process 3 times, focusing on different aspects each time. Evening analysis. Review your day's repetitions and document any patterns or anomalies. But here's what makes this powerful. You're not just repeating actions. You're training your mind to see deeper into the nature of things. Every repetition is an opportunity to notice something new, to understand something deeper. I want you to understand something crucial about this practice. It's not about being mechanical. It's about developing the kind of patience and attention that can reveal breakthrough insights. When you truly embrace monotony, you develop a level of awareness that most people never achieve. Remember this, some of the greatest inventions in history came from people who were willing to do the same thing thousands of times, watching for the tiny variation that would reveal a new possibility. The Wright brothers made the same wind tunnel tests over and over. Pasteur examined the same samples countless times. Breakthrough lives in these repeated observations. Your mind naturally seeks novelty, but true insight often requires the opposite, the willingness to look at the same thing again and again until you see what others miss. This is where invention lives. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, don't seek excitement. Seek understanding through repetition. This is how inventors think. This is how breakthroughs are discovered. What will you observe 100 times today? Here's something that might shock you. There's no such thing as a completely original invention. Everything new is built on something that came before. The key isn't to create from nothing. It's to steal like a strategist, to take existing ideas and transform them into something unprecedented. Let me tell you about how I developed the light bulb. I didn't invent electric light. Arc lamps already existed. I didn't invent glass bulbs or filaments. What I did was study every existing technology, steal the best elements from each, and combine them in a way no one had considered before. That's what real invention looks like. This is where most minds go wrong. They try to be original. They try to create something completely new. But the inventor's mind, it understands that innovation comes from strategic combination, not pure creation. Everything that exists is raw material for your next invention. For the next phase of our 30-day journey, you're going to learn to steal like a strategist. But let me be clear, this isn't about copying. This is about understanding how to take existing elements and transform them into something new through deliberate combination and modification. First, you need to understand the 3 levels of strategic stealing that every inventor must master. Level 1 is component stealing, taking specific elements from existing solutions. Level 2 is process stealing, adapting methodologies from unrelated fields. Level 3 is principle stealing, extracting fundamental concepts and applying them in new contexts. Let's start with component stealing. Look at any problem you're trying to solve. Now identify 10 existing solutions, not just in your field, but in any field. What specific components make each solution work? How could those components be adapted for your purpose? Here's your first daily practice, the theft inventory. Every morning, choose one challenge you're working on. Find 3 completely unrelated fields that solve similar problems. List every component of their solutions that could be useful to you. Next comes process stealing. This is where you look at how things are done in other fields and adapt those methods to your work. When I was developing the assembly line for my laboratory, I didn't look at other inventors. I studied slaughterhouses. Their process of continuous flow gave me the insight I needed. Create what I call a process map. Take a successful process from any field, manufacturing, nature, art, anything. Break it down into its basic steps. Now, translate each step into your context. How could that process work for your challenge? Now for principle stealing. This is where you extract the fundamental principles that make something work and apply them in new ways. When I was working on the phonograph, I stole the principle of wave transmission from water ripples. The principle was the same, even though the application was completely different. Let me share a secret from my years of invention. The best things to steal from are often the things most unlike your project. The further removed something is from your field, the more innovative your adaptation will seem. For these next 30 days, I want you to become a strategic thief. But remember, this isn't about copying surface features. It's about understanding the deeper principles that make things work and finding new ways to apply them. Here's your daily framework. Morning theft. Identify 3 things to steal from: components, processes, or principles. Midday integration. Spend 30 minutes combining stolen elements in new ways. Evening analysis. Document how you've transformed what you've stolen. But here's what makes this powerful. You're not just collecting ideas, you're training your mind to see the underlying patterns that connect seemingly unrelated things. Every act of strategic stealing makes you better at seeing these connections. I want you to understand something crucial about this practice. It's not about lacking creativity. It's about understanding that creativity comes from combination and transformation, not from conjuring things out of nothing. The most innovative inventors in history were also the most strategic thieves. Remember this: nature itself works this way. Evolution doesn't create new features from nothing. It adapts existing structures to new purposes. The wing was once a foreleg. The ear was once a gill. Innovation comes from adaptation and combination. Your mind has been trained to value originality, but true invention comes from strategic transformation of what already exists. Every field, every process, every solution you encounter is raw material for your next breakthrough. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, don't try to be original. Be strategic. Look around you. Everything you see is a potential component of your next invention. This is how inventors think. This is how breakthroughs are built. What will you steal and transform today? Let me tell you about the most valuable 30 minutes of my day. Every morning, before the world woke up, before my laboratory hummed with activity, I would lock myself away with one problem, one idea, one challenge. 30 minutes of pure, uninterrupted obsession. This wasn't just focus. This was controlled monomania. I remember the mornings I spent obsessing over the filament problem, 30 minutes every day, thinking about nothing else, not checking notes, not testing materials, just Pure, concentrated thought about one specific aspect of the challenge. Those morning obsession windows led to more breakthroughs than weeks of regular work. This is where most minds go wrong. They try to solve problems with divided attention. They multitask. They switch between challenges. But the inventor's mind? It understands the power of temporary obsession, the ability to shut out everything else and dive deep into a single problem. For the next phase of our 30-day journey, you're going to build your daily obsession window. But let me be clear, this isn't about working longer hours. This is about creating a daily period of intense, focused obsession that will transform how your mind approaches problems. First, you need to understand the 3 levels of obsession that every inventor must master. Level 1 is problem obsession, focusing entirely on understanding a specific challenge. Level 2 is solution obsession, exploring every possible approach to solving that challenge. Level 3 is detail obsession, examining every aspect of your chosen solution. Let's start with creating your obsession window. Choose a time, preferably early morning, when your mind is fresh and the world is quiet. 30 minutes, no more, no less. This time must be sacred. No interruptions, no distractions, no compromises. Here's your first daily practice, the single problem focus. Choose one specific aspect of your current challenge. Not the whole problem, one specific part. For 30 minutes, think about nothing else. Don't write, don't test, don't research. Just think. Next comes the obsession protocol. This is where you prepare your mind for deep focus. Clear your space, clear your thoughts. Have one specific question written down. When your obsession window begins, that question becomes your entire world. In my laboratory, we called this the Edison hour, though it was really 30 minutes. Everyone knew that during this time, nothing else mattered. No messages would be delivered, no questions would be asked, no decisions would be made, just pure, focused obsession on our chosen problem. Now for the obsession documentation. The moment your 30 minutes end, write down everything, not during the obsession window, after. This separation between thinking and recording is crucial. It allows your mind to focus entirely on the problem during the window. Let me share a secret from my years of invention. The human mind is capable of incredible depth when it's properly focused. But this kind of focus can't be maintained all day. That's why the time limit is crucial. 30 minutes of true obsession is worth more than hours of divided attention. For these next 30 days, I want you to become fanatical about your obsession window. But remember, this isn't about quantity of time. It's about quality of focus. 30 minutes of pure obsession will transform how your mind works for the entire day. Here's your daily framework. Morning preparation. Choose your specific focus. For today's obsession window, 30 minutes of pure, uninterrupted focus on your chosen aspect. Immediate documentation. Record everything that emerged during your obsession. But here's what makes this powerful. You're not just solving problems. You're training your mind to reach levels of focus and insight that most people never experience. Every obsession window strengthens your ability to think deeply. I want you to understand something crucial about this practice. It's not about being productive. It's about developing the kind of focused intensity that leads to breakthrough insights. When you give your mind permission to become temporarily obsessed with a single problem, it will show you solutions you never would have seen otherwise. Remember this: some of the greatest breakthroughs in history came from people who allowed themselves to become temporarily obsessed with specific problems. Newton's obsession with light, Darwin's obsession with species variation. These focused periods of intense concentration changed our understanding of the world. Your mind is capable of incredible insights, but it needs the right conditions to reach them. The daily obsession window creates those conditions. This is where invention lives. Tomorrow morning when you wake up, don't start your day with email or news or social media. Start it with 30 minutes of pure obsession. This is how inventors think. This is how breakthroughs are born. What will you obsess about tomorrow? I didn't fail 10,000 times while inventing the light bulb. I successfully discovered 10,000 ways that wouldn't work. Each so-called failure was actually a critical piece of data that brought me closer to success. This isn't just positive thinking, it's the core of the inventor's mindset. Every failure is feedback, and feedback is the fuel of invention. Let me take you back to my laboratory during those countless light bulb experiments. Each time a filament burned out, my team didn't see failure, they saw information. What temperature did it reach? How long did it last? What color was the light? Every failure was actually a successful experiment in eliminating possibilities. This is where most minds go wrong. They see failure as the opposite of success. But the inventor's mind? It understands that failure is simply success in discovering what doesn't work. And knowing what doesn't work is often more valuable than guessing what might work. For the next phase of our 30-day journey, you're going to radically redefine your relationship with failure. But let me be clear, this isn't about becoming comfortable with failure. This is about becoming obsessed with the information that failure provides. First, you need to understand the 3 levels of failure feedback that every inventor must master. Level 1 is technical feedback, what specifically didn't work and why. Level 2 is pattern feedback, what this failure reveals about the broader system. Level 3 is direction feedback, how this failure points toward potential solutions. Let's start with technical feedback. From this moment forward, every time something fails, you're going to document it with scientific precision. What exactly happened? What were the conditions? What preceded the failure? What followed it? Here's your first daily practice, the failure analysis protocol. Every time something doesn't work as expected, spend 10 minutes breaking down exactly what happened. Don't focus on the fact that it failed. Focus on the specific nature of the failure. Next comes pattern recognition. This is where you start connecting your failures to see the bigger picture. In my laboratory, we kept detailed records of every failed experiment. When we looked at them together, patterns emerged that we never would have seen by focusing on individual failures. Create what I call a failure map. Document each failure, then start drawing connections between them. What common elements do you see? What unexpected relationships emerge? The patterns in your failures often reveal the path to success. Now, for directional learning. This is where you use your failures to guide your next attempts. But here's the key. Don't just avoid what failed. Use the specific nature of the failure to inform your next direction. If something fails by being too brittle, don't just make it stronger. Understand why it needed strength in that particular way. Let me share a secret from my years of invention. The most valuable failures are the ones that surprise you. When something fails exactly as you expected, you learn little. But when something fails in an unexpected way, you've just discovered new territory to explore. For these next 30 days, I want you to become a scientist of failure. But remember, this isn't about celebrating failure. It's about extracting maximum learning from every unsuccessful attempt. Here's your daily framework. Morning review. Examine yesterday's failures with fresh eyes, midday documentation. Record every failure as it happens, with complete detail. Evening analysis. Look for patterns and unexpected relationships in your day's failures. But here's what makes this powerful. You're not just accepting failure. You're training your mind to see failure as a source of crucial data. Every failure becomes an experiment that yields valuable information. I want you to understand something crucial about this practice. It's not about being positive in the face of failure. It's about being scientific about failure. When you approach failure as a researcher rather than a judge, every unsuccessful attempt becomes a successful experiment in learning. Remember this, some of the most important discoveries in history came from failures. Penicillin came from a failed experiment in bacteria growth. The pacemaker came from a failed attempt at recording heartbeats. X-rays were discovered during a failed attempt to create a different kind of radiation tube. Your mind naturally wants to avoid and forget failures, but when you learn to see failure as feedback, every unsuccessful attempt becomes a step toward breakthrough. This is where invention lives. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, don't try to avoid failure. Seek it out. Document it. Learn from it. This is how inventors think. This is how breakthroughs are discovered. What will you learn from failure today? There's something powerful about working while the rest of the world sleeps. I discovered this early in my career, those quiet hours when phones don't ring, when messages don't arrive, when the world's distractions fade away. This isn't just about working longer hours. It's about finding the spaces where your mind can truly focus without the world's interference. Let me take you back to my laboratory at 3 a.m. The streets of Menlo Park were silent. Most of my team had gone home, but in that quietness, in that solitude, some of our greatest breakthroughs happened. The phonograph's first successful recording was made at 3:30 in the morning. The first sustained light bulb filament burned at 1:30 a.m. This is where most minds go wrong. They follow the world's schedule. They work when everyone works. But the inventor's mind, it understands that breakthrough often happens in the spaces between, in the quiet hours when others rest. For the next phase of our 30-day journey, you're going to learn to use these hidden hours. But let me be clear, this isn't about sleep deprivation. This is about finding and using the quiet spaces that exist in every 24-hour cycle. First, you need to understand the 3 levels of solitary work that every inventor must master. Level 1 is time isolation, finding periods when the world won't interrupt you. Level 2 is mental isolation, learning to think clearly when others are asleep. Level 3 is creative isolation, using solitude to push beyond conventional thinking. Let's start with time isolation. Look at your current schedule. Where are the quiet hours? Maybe it's early morning before dawn. Maybe it's late at night. Maybe it's that dead zone in the middle of the afternoon. Find your quiet time and claim it. Here's your first daily practice. The solitude schedule. Choose 1 hour that exists outside the world's normal rhythm. Commit to using that hour every day for your most important work. No exceptions, no excuses. Next comes mental isolation. This is where you learn to think differently in these quiet hours. Your mind works differently. When it knows the world is asleep, use this. In my laboratory, our late-night experiments often took directions we never would have tried during regular hours. Create what I call a night mind map. During your quiet hours, let your thinking range wider than it does during the day. Explore ideas that seem too strange for daylight. Write down thoughts that you might censor during regular hours. Now, for creative isolation. This is where you use your solitary time to push beyond conventional thinking. But here's the key. You must give yourself permission to be different during these hours. The ideas you pursue at 3 a.m. don't need to make sense at 3 p.m. Let me share a secret from my years of invention. The world's rhythm can be a cage for your thinking. When you work while others sleep, you free your mind from that cage. You think thoughts that wouldn't survive in daylight. Sometimes these are exactly the thoughts you need. For these next 30 days, I want you to become a master of hidden hours. But remember, this isn't about exhausting yourself. It's about finding and using the quiet spaces where your mind can work without the world's interference. Here's your daily framework. Choose your hour. Identify your daily period of solitude. Protect it fiercely. Let nothing and no one claim this. Time, use it differently. Don't just work. Think differently during this time. But here's what makes this powerful. You're not just working when it's quiet. You're training your mind to think beyond the boundaries of conventional schedules and conventional thinking. Every solitary hour strengthens your ability to think originally. I want you to understand something crucial about this practice. It's not about being antisocial. It's about understanding that some kinds of thinking, some kinds of work, some kinds of invention can only happen in solitude. When you embrace these hidden hours, you gain access to parts of your mind that stay hidden during regular hours. Remember this: some of the most important breakthroughs in history happened while the world slept. Newton developed calculus during the years he isolated himself from London's plague. Einstein developed relativity theory while working solitary nights as a patent clerk. Isolation isn't just helpful for invention, sometimes it's necessary. Your mind has capabilities that only emerge in solitude. The quiet hours are when these capabilities can fully express themselves. This is where invention lives. Tomorrow morning, or tonight, or whenever you find your quiet hour, don't just work. Think differently, explore differently, create differently. This is how inventors think. This is how breakthroughs happen in the hidden hours. What will you discover when the world is sleeping? Here's something most people get wrong about invention. They think it's a solitary pursuit. But I built Menlo Park, the world's first industrial research laboratory, because I understood that breakthrough needs both collaboration and strong, individual vision. The trick isn't avoiding collaboration. It's learning to collaborate without compromising your core ideas. Let me take you inside my laboratory during the development of the light bulb. I had dozens of skilled craftsmen, engineers, and scientists working together. But here's what made it work. Everyone understood their role in service of a central vision. They weren't there to change the direction. They were there to help navigate the course. This is where most minds go wrong. They either avoid collaboration entirely, fearing it will dilute their vision, or they compromise too much in the name of teamwork. But the inventor's mind? It understands that powerful collaboration actually strengthens individual vision when managed correctly. For the next phase of our 30-day journey, you're going to learn the art of uncompromising collaboration. But let me be clear, this isn't about being difficult or inflexible. This is about learning to work with others in a way that enhances rather than diminishes your vision. First, you need to understand the 3 levels of collaborative invention that every inventor must master. Level 1 is vision clarity, knowing exactly what you're trying to create. Level 2 is role clarity, understanding exactly what you need from others. Level 3 is boundary clarity, knowing what's negotiable and what isn't. Let's start with vision clarity. Before you bring anyone else into your project, you need to define your vision with absolute precision. What exactly are you trying to create? What are its essential characteristics? What aspects are fundamental and unchangeable? Here's your first daily practice: the Vision Statement Protocol. Write down your vision in exact detail, not just what you're creating, but why it matters and what specific qualities it must have. This becomes your collaboration compass. Next comes role clarity. This is where you define exactly what you need from others. In my laboratory, everyone knew their specific role in the larger vision. One person's expertise in glass blowing, another's knowledge of electrical resistance. Each contribution was clearly defined. Create what I call a collaboration map. For each aspect of your project, identify what specific expertise or assistance you need. Don't look for general help. Look for specific contributions that advance your vision. Now, for boundary clarity. This is where you define what's negotiable and what isn't. But here's the key. You must be absolutely clear about these boundaries before collaboration begins. In my laboratory, certain aspects of each invention were open for discussion, while others were fixed and unchangeable. Let me share a secret from my years of invention. The strongest collaborations happen when boundaries are clearest, when people know exactly what's open for discussion and what isn't. They can contribute more effectively within those parameters. For these next 30 days, I want you to become a master of directed collaboration. But remember, this isn't about controlling others. It's about creating clear channels where their expertise can flow toward your vision. Here's your daily framework: morning vision, review. Reaffirm your core vision and non-negotiable elements. Midday collaboration. Check. Ensure all interactions are aligned with your vision. Evening boundary assessment. Review where boundaries held or needed adjustment. But here's what makes this powerful. You're not just working with others, you're training yourself to maintain strong vision while leveraging the expertise of others. Every collaboration becomes an opportunity to strengthen rather than dilute your ideas. I want you to understand something crucial about this practice. It's not about being rigid. It's about being clear. When you're absolutely clear about your vision and boundaries, you can be incredibly flexible within those parameters. Remember this, some of the greatest inventions in history came from strong individual vision supported by skilled collaboration. The Wright brothers maintained their vision while working with dozens of experts. Ford held his vision of the assembly line while incorporating insights from countless workers and engineers. Your mind has a unique vision to offer the world. Collaboration should enhance that vision, not compromise it. This is where invention lives. Tomorrow morning, when you start your day, don't choose between collaboration and vision. Choose both. Be clear about what you're creating. Be clear about what you need from others. Be clear about your boundaries. This is how inventors think. This is how breakthroughs happen through teamwork. Who will you collaborate with today? And how will you ensure your vision stays strong? The greatest mistake an inventor can make is solving just one problem. When I created the light bulb, I didn't just create a device. I built an entire system for electrical power generation and distribution. The real breakthrough wasn't the EI bulb itself. It was the system that made the bulb useful to the world. Let me take you back to the early days of electrical innovation. Others had created electric lights before me, but they failed because they thought too small. They solved the lighting problem without building a system to support it. I understood that the real invention needed to be bigger than the bulb. This is where most minds go wrong. They focus on individual solutions to specific problems. But the inventor's mind, it sees how each solution can become part of a larger system. It understands that true breakthrough comes from creating frameworks that solve multiple problems at once. For the next phase of our 30-day journey, you're going to learn to think in systems. But let me be clear, this isn't about making things more complicated. This is about creating solutions that are self-sustaining and scalable because they're part of a larger framework. First, you need to understand the 3 levels of systems thinking that every inventor must master. Level 1 is solution expansion, seeing how one solution can solve multiple problems. Level 2 is infrastructure development, creating the support systems that make solutions viable. Level 3 is framework creation, building systems that generate new solutions automatically. Let's start with solution expansion. Take any problem you're working on right now. Don't just solve it, expand it. How could your solution address other related problems? How could it create new opportunities beyond the original challenge? Here's your first daily practice. The system. Mapping protocol. Every time you develop a solution, spend 30 minutes expanding it into a system. What else could this solve? What other applications might it have? What larger framework could it be part of? Next comes infrastructure development. This is where you build the support systems that make your solution viable in the real world. When I developed the light bulb, I simultaneously developed power generation stations, distribution networks, and safety systems. The bulb was just one part of a massive infrastructure. Create what I call a support web. For any solution you're working on, map out everything it needs to function in the real world. Power sources, maintenance systems, distribution networks, user interfaces, everything that makes your solution actually work. Now, for framework creation. This is where you develop systems that don't just solve problems. They prevent problems from occurring or create new opportunities automatically. But here's the key. Your framework must be self-sustaining and able to evolve. Let me share a secret from my years of invention. The most powerful systems are often invisible to the users. People don't see the electrical grid, They just flip. A switch and get light. The best systems solve problems so smoothly that people forget the problems ever existed. For these next 30 days, I want you to become obsessed with systems thinking. But remember, this isn't about complexity. It's about creating frameworks that make solutions work better, last longer, and solve more problems. Here's your daily framework. Morning system review. Look at your current projects through a systems lens. Midday expansion. Take one solution and expand it into a larger system. Evening framework. Check. Ensure your systems are self-sustaining and scalable. But here's what makes this powerful. You're not just solving problems. You're training your mind to see the larger frameworks that make solutions truly valuable. Every system you build strengthens your ability to think on a larger scale. I want you to understand something crucial about this practice. It's not about making things more complicated. It's about creating solutions that work better because they're part of a well-designed system. When you think in systems, you solve problems more completely and create more value. Remember this: some of the most important inventions in history weren't single solutions. They were systems. The internet isn't just computers talking to each other. It's a system that created entirely new possibilities for human communication and commerce. The assembly line wasn't just a faster way to build cars. It was a system that transformed manufacturing forever. Your mind is capable of more than just solving problems. It can create systems that transform how problems are solved. This is where invention lives. Tomorrow morning, when you look at your challenges, don't just seek solutions. Look for systems. How can your solution become part of something bigger? How can it solve multiple problems? How can it create new opportunities? This is how inventors think. This is how breakthroughs become transformations. What system will you begin building today? Most people think curiosity is something you either have or you don't. They're wrong. Curiosity is a muscle, and like any muscle, it grows stronger with deliberate exercise. I didn't discover thousands of ways to make a light bulb because I was naturally curious. I trained myself to be relentlessly inquisitive about everything. Let me take you back to my early days as an inventor. I wasn't born asking questions about everything. I developed this habit deliberately, forcing myself to look deeper into every process, every material, every failure. I trained my curiosity until it became an unstoppable force. This is where most minds go wrong. They wait for curiosity to strike naturally. But the inventor's mind? It actively cultivates curiosity, deliberately exercising it until it becomes second nature, until asking why becomes as natural as breathing. For the next phase of our 30-day journey, you're going to train your curiosity like the powerful muscle it is. But let me be clear, this isn't about being randomly inquisitive. This is about developing structured, deliberate curiosity that leads to breakthrough insights. First, you need to understand the 3 levels of curiosity training that every inventor must master. Level 1 is surface curiosity, learning to questions, the obvious. Level 2 is deep curiosity, probing beyond initial answers. Level 3 is systematic curiosity, creating frameworks for continuous questioning. Let's start with surface curiosity. Look around you right now. Choose any object, a pen, a cup, a chair. Now force yourself to ask 10 questions about it. Not just obvious questions. Push yourself to ask questions that make others uncomfortable with their depth or seeming absurdity. Here's your first daily practice: the question multiplication exercise. Every morning, choose one ordinary object or process. Force yourself to ask 20 questions about it. The first 5 will be easy. The next 5 will be harder. The last 10, that's where the gold lies. Next comes deep curiosity. This is where you learn to probe beyond initial answers. When you get an answer, immediately ask 3 more questions about that answer. In my laboratory, we called this drilling down. Every answer was just an invitation to dig deeper, create what I call a curiosity chain. Start with one question, get an answer, then immediately branch out into multiple questions about that answer. Keep going until you reach insights that surprise you. That's how we discovered that bamboo could make an effective light bulb filament, by following a chain of curiosity about plant fibers. Now for systematic curiosity. This is where you develop frameworks that generate questions automatically. But here's the key. Your framework must push you beyond comfortable questions into territory that makes you and others slightly uncomfortable. Let me share a secret from my years of invention. The most valuable questions are often the ones that seem ridiculous at first. When I asked, what if we could capture sound in physical form? People thought it was absurd. But that absurd question led to the phonograph for Avon. These next 30 days, I want you to become a warrior of curiosity. But remember, this isn't about asking random questions. It's about developing disciplined, deliberate curiosity that leads to genuine insights. Here's your daily framework. Morning questions. 20 questions about one ordinary object. Midday. Drilling. Take 3 answers and probe them deeper. Evening reflection. Review which questions led to unexpected insights. But here's what makes this powerful. You're not just asking questions. You're training your mind to see questions where others see givens. Every exercise in curiosity strengthens your ability to discover what others miss. I want you to understand something crucial about this practice. It's not about being annoying with endless questions. It's about developing the kind of structured curiosity that leads to breakthrough insights. When you train your curiosity systematically, you develop the ability to see possibilities that others miss completely. Remember this. Some of the most important discoveries in history came from people who trained themselves to be systematically curious. Galileo's relentless questioning of traditional astronomy, Darwin's systematic curiosity about species variations. These weren't just naturally curious people. They were masters of deliberate inquisitiveness. Your mind has an infinite capacity for curiosity, but like any muscle, it needs regular exercise to reach its full potential. This is where invention lives. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, don't just start your day. Start your curiosity training. Look at the most ordinary object and force yourself to ask extraordinary questions. This is how inventors think. This is how breakthroughs begin. What will you be systematically curious about today? Most people see constraints as obstacles to creativity. They're wrong. Constraints are the forcing function that drives true innovation. When I was developing the light bulb, our greatest breakthroughs came not from abundance of resources, but from their scarcity. We had to innovate inside the box, not outside it. Let me take you back to a crucial moment in my laboratory. We were trying to find the perfect filament material, but our budget was limited. Instead of wishing for more expensive materials, we were forced to experiment with common items: cotton thread, bamboo, even fishing line. This constraint pushed us to discover solutions we never would have found with unlimited resources. This is where most minds go wrong. They wait for perfect conditions, for more resources, for fewer limitations. But the inventor's mind? It understands that constraints are not limitations. They're tools for forcing creative solutions. The tighter the constraint, the more innovative. The solution must be, for the next phase of our 30-day journey, you're going to learn to use constraints as creative catalysts. But let me be clear, this isn't about making things harder for yourself. This is about using limitations to force your mind to find solutions it wouldn't discover in conditions of abundance. First, you need to understand the 3 levels of constraint-driven innovation that every inventor must master. Level 1 is resource constraints, working with limited materials or tools. Level 2 is time constraints, using deadlines to force rapid innovation. Level 3 is conceptual constraints, deliberately limiting your solution space to force creativity. Let's start with resource constraints. Look at your current challenge. Now, remove half of your available resources. What solutions become possible when you can't rely on having everything you need? How does your thinking change when abundance isn't an option? Here's your first daily practice, the constraint addition exercise. Every morning, take your main challenge and add 3 new constraints to it: less time, fewer resources, stricter requirements. Then force yourself to find solutions within these tightened boundaries. Next comes time constraints. This is where you use deadlines not as stress inducers, but as creativity catalysts. In my laboratory, we often set impossible deadlines, not because we could always meet them, but because the pressure forced us to think differently. Create what I call a time pressure framework. Break your project into small chunks, then give each chunk a deadline that seems slightly too short. Watch how your mind finds creative shortcuts when it doesn't have the luxury of time. Now, for conceptual constraints. This is where you deliberately limit your solution space to force innovative thinking. But here's the key. Your constraints should seem almost absurd in their limitation. Want to solve a communication problem? Force yourself to do it without words. Want to improve a process? Ban the use of technology. Let me share a secret from my years of invention. The most innovative solutions often come from the most severe constraints. The phonograph emerged from the constraint of not being able to see sound. The light bulb succeeded because we couldn't use the obvious materials. For these next 30 days, I want you to become a master of constraint-driven innovation. But remember, this isn't about making your work harder. It's about using constraints to force your mind into new territories of solution finding. Here's your daily framework. Morning Constraint Edition. Add 3 new limitations to your current challenge. Midday pressure check. Create artificial deadlines for afternoon tasks. Evening reflection. Review which constraints led to unexpected solutions. But here's what makes this powerful. You're not just working with limitations. You're training your mind to see constraints as tools rather than obstacles. Every constraint becomes an opportunity to think differently. I want you to understand something crucial about this practice. It's not about learning to cope with limitations. It's about actively using constraints to force creative solutions. When you embrace constraints as creativity tools, you develop the ability to innovate in any situation. Remember this: some of the most important innovations in history came from severe constraints. The Apollo 13 rescue succeeded because of constraints, not despite them. The first vaccines were developed with severely limited technology. Constraints don't prevent innovation, they demand it. Your mind has an amazing ability to find solutions, but it often needs the pressure of constraints to reach its full creative potential. This is where invention lives. Tomorrow morning, when you face your challenges, don't wish for fewer constraints. Add more. Make your boundaries tighter. Force your mind to find solutions in seemingly impossible conditions. This is how inventors think. This is how breakthroughs happen under pressure. What constraints will you add to force creativity today? Here's something most people don't understand about invention. Your first thought is rarely your best thought. Every idea needs time to mature, to evolve, to reveal its hidden potential. I never acted on an idea immediately. I let it sit for at least 10 days, then looked at it with fresh eyes. This simple practice led to some of my most important breakthroughs. Let me take you back to the development of the phonograph. The initial idea seemed complete, a device to record and play. Back sound. But after letting it sit for 10 days, new possibilities emerged. What if it could record multiple voices? What if the recording could be duplicated? The 10-day wait revealed opportunities we hadn't initially seen. This is where most minds go wrong. They rush to execute their first idea, treating it as if it's their only idea. But the inventor's mind? It understands that ideas are living things that need time to grow. The first version of an idea is just a seed. It needs time and patience to reveal its full potential. For the next phase of our 30-day journey, you're going to learn the art of strategic patience. But let me be clear, this isn't about procrastination. This is about giving your ideas the time they need to mature and reveal their hidden dimensions. First, you need to understand the 3 levels of idea maturation that every inventor must master. Level 1 is initial capture. recording your idea in complete detail. Level 2 is structured waiting, using the 10-day period strategically. Level 3 is systematic review, examining your idea with fresh perspective after the waiting period. Let's start with initial capture. From this moment forward, every time you have an idea, document it completely, not just the basic concept, every detail, every question, every potential problem. Create a complete snapshot of your thinking at that moment. Here's your first daily practice: the idea documentation protocol. Every time an idea strikes, spend 15 minutes writing down everything about it. What inspired it? What problems might it solve? What challenges might it face? Create a complete record of your initial thinking. Next comes structured waiting. This is where you use the 10-day waiting period actively, not passively. In my laboratory, we would capture related ideas during the waiting period, but we wouldn't modify the original concept. This creates a fascinating tension between your initial thought and your evolving understanding. Create what I call an idea incubation journal. During the 10-day wait, record every new thought related to your original idea, but keep them separate from the original concept. Watch how your thinking evolves without letting it contaminate your first vision. Now for systematic review. This is where you examine your original idea with fresh eyes after 10 days have passed. But here's the key: you must review both your original documentation and your incubation notes. The contrast between them often reveals new possibilities. Let me share a secret from my years of invention. The 10-day wait often shows you that your original idea was solving the wrong problem. The light bulb started as an idea for improving gas lighting. The 10-day wait helped us see that we needed to think beyond improvement to replacement. For these next 30 days, I want you to become a master of strategic patience. But remember, this isn't about slowing down your innovation. It's about giving your ideas the time they need to reveal their full potential. Here's your daily framework. Morning review. Examine ideas that have completed their 10-day wait midday. Capture, document new ideas with complete detail. Evening incubation. Review and add to your incubation notes for waiting ideas. But here's what makes this powerful. You're not just waiting. You're training your mind to think more deeply about each idea. Every 10-day wait strengthens your ability to see beyond the obvious. I want you to understand something crucial about this practice. It's not about delay. It's about giving your subconscious mind time to work on your ideas. When you return to an idea after 10 days, you're not just seeing it with fresh eyes. You're seeing it with a mind that has been quietly working on it the entire time. Remember this: some of the most important refinements in history came from inventors who were willing to wait. Alexander Graham Bell's telephone underwent significant changes during development because he was willing to let his ideas mature. The Wright brothers repeatedly refined their designs by stepping back and revisiting their concepts. Your mind continues to work on ideas even when you're not consciously thinking about them. The 10-day wait allows this deeper processing to occur. This is where invention lives. Tomorrow morning, when a new idea strikes, don't rush to execute it. Document it completely, then give it the time it needs to mature. This is how inventors think. This is how breakthroughs evolve from good ideas into great innovations. Which of your ideas will complete its 10-day wait tomorrow? The greatest invention you'll ever work on isn't the light bulb, the phonograph, or any other physical device. It's you. Your mind, your habits, your patterns of thinking. These are your most important inventions, and like any invention, they need to be regularly upgraded, refined, and sometimes completely redesigned. Let me share something I never told the newspapers. Every 30 days, I would systematically break and rebuild my own work habits. If I had been working primarily in the morning, I'd switch to night. If I had been focusing on electrical problems, I deliberately shift to mechanical ones. This wasn't about variety. It was about forcing my mind to remain adaptable. This is where most minds go wrong. They find a way of working that's good enough, and they stick with it. But the inventor's mind? It understands that patterns become ruts, and ruts are the enemy of innovation. Every 30 days, you need to break your patterns deliberately. For the final phase of our 30-day journey, you're going to learn the art of systematic self-reinvention. But let me be clear, this isn't about random changes. This is about deliberately breaking and rebuilding your patterns to keep your mind sharp and adaptable. First, you need to understand the 3 levels of self-reinvention that every inventor must master. Level 1 is habit reinvention, changing how you work. Level 2 is perspective reinvention, changing how you think. Level 3 is identity reinvention, changing how you see yourself as an inventor. Let's start with habit reinvention. Look at your current work patterns. When do you think best? When do you create? When do you analyze? Now prepare to change all of it, not because your current patterns are wrong, but because any pattern, if maintained too long, becomes a limitation. Here's your first practice for the next 30 days, the pattern-breaking protocol. Identify your 3 most ingrained work habits. Now design their opposite. If you're a morning person, become a night owl. If you start with details, start with the big picture. If you work in silence, work with noise. Next comes perspective, reinvention. This is where you deliberately change how you look at problems. In my laboratory, we would regularly force ourselves to approach familiar problems from completely new angles. If we had been thinking about electricity in terms of flow, we'd switch to thinking about it in terms of waves, create what I call a perspective rotation schedule. Every week, force yourself to adopt a completely different viewpoint on your main. Challenge: if you've been thinking like an engineer, think like an artist. If you've been thinking like a builder, think like a user. Now for identity reinvention. This is where you deliberately shift how you see yourself as an inventor. But here's the key. Each new identity must be specific and must last for the full 30 days. 1 month, you're a problem solver. The next, you're a system builder. Next, you're a pattern breaker. Let me share a secret from my years of invention. The most dangerous thing for an inventor isn't failure. It's comfort. When you're comfortable with your patterns, you stop seeing new possibilities. The 30-day reinvention cycle prevents this comfort from setting in. For these next 30 days, I want you to become obsessed with reinvention. But remember, this isn't about change for change's sake. It's about maintaining the mental flexibility that invention requires. Here's your daily framework. Morning identity. Check. Remind yourself of your current inventor identity midday pattern. Break. Force yourself to work in ways that feel unnatural. Evening reflection. Document how the new patterns affected your thinking. But here's what makes this powerful. You're not just changing habits. You're training your mind to remain adaptable and resistant to routine. Every 30-day reinvention strengthens your ability to think flexibly and see new possibilities. I want you to understand something crucial about this practice. It's not about finding the perfect way to work. It's about maintaining the ability to work effectively in any way. When you regularly reinvent your patterns, you develop a kind of mental adaptability that most people never achieve. Remember this: some of the most important breakthroughs in history came from people who were willing to reinvent themselves. Darwin reinvented himself from a conventional naturalist to a revolutionary thinker. Einstein reinvented himself from a patent clerk to a theoretical physicist. Your capacity for reinvention is your capacity for breakthrough. Your mind is not a fixed tool. It's a constantly evolving invention. Every 30 days, you have the opportunity to upgrade it, refine it, and sometimes completely redesign it. This is where invention lives. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, don't just start another day. Start another version of yourself. Break your patterns, change your perspective, reinvent your identity as an inventor. This is how inventors think. This is how breakthroughs become possible. What version of yourself will you begin inventing tomorrow?